Hey, Michael, how's Ignite going for you so far?
Ignite is busy, fun, and exciting. And we're having so many customers come up and talk to us about Azure Local. So I think that's what we're here for, right?
Absolutely. I think it would be a great idea to explain to some folks that maybe have never really looked much at Azure Local a little bit of what the overall solution is and what we're doing with it. And probably the best place to start is with Azure Arc. What do you think?
Yeah, so let's dive into Azure Arc. And you can see that, in Azure Arc, we've got a lot of different resources that are connected to Azure, regardless of where they are in the world. And so you can see lots of different things. And in this case, we'll start with machines. Now, anything can be a machine in Azure Arc. That could be a physical or a virtual machine running on AWS, on VMware, on Hyper-V, or on Azure Local. And so you can see very quickly that we have lots of machines. And in this case, I'm going to drill down to this physical server. So this is Orlando Node 1. And you can see that this is a physical server running on Lenovo ThinkSystem SE350s. Same model we have here in the booth, right? This is Arc enabled. And what happened is I took this and the other node and I went through the deployment process and I created a hypervisor or a infrastructure for Azure to use, right? And so now you can see the Orlando cluster in all of its glory, and it's a 2-node cluster ready to go and take on virtual machines and Kubernetes workloads. Now I went through this with a cloud deployment process. So you see this is a fully stepped out process that I used a template to deploy out, or you could use the UI that spits out in a couple of hours a fully functional Azure infrastructure that I can deploy, again, VMs or Kubernetes workloads to.
I'm noticing there's a lot of information across the screen that we're seeing right now as you drill down in.
Yep.
And I know that we'll be talking a little bit more about deployment in later sessions. And we're also going to talk about not just the host deployment, but the workload deployments. Can you tell me a little bit, is there a huge difference between how you would deploy a virtual machine versus, for example, like a Kubernetes cluster?
Yeah, no. So if you're used to deploying VMs in Azure or deploying Kubernetes into Azure, it's exactly that same experience with a few little tweaks because we're thinking of on-premises. So when you go to create a VM here in Orlando, you're going to select things like a resource group that you would normally select in Azure, right? But what gets different is the type of resources that are available. In this case, I get to choose between a standard or a trusted launch virtual machine. I get to choose the image that's available. See, there's not marketplace images that are available to the entire public. You bring down those marketplace images to Azure Local, and you kind of pick and choose with RBAC roles who can do what. So you have a little more finite control. So in this case, we can deploy an Ubuntu image. We can then pick the size of that VM, attach a GPU if we're using that, and keep in mind, these are all the resources that I own, right? And then create an SSH key. That experience aligns. And whether you use the UI for a one-off or you use command line, or even more scalable solutions like Bicep or Terraform, these options are available to you the same regardless of how you do that.
Interesting. So, out of curiosity, is the Kubernetes experience relatively similar to that?
Yeah. So in the case of Kubernetes, you can see here I have an actual running Kubernetes cluster, and I deployed this using CLI. But you can use the UI just the same, or again, you can use Bicep or even Terraform to do this. Now, once you've deployed that Kubernetes cluster, you can then layer it on with extensions. The same as you would apply extensions to VMs, you can layer on extensions to make that a more usable experience. So in this case, I've used extensions like container storage and certificate manager, and even Azure policy to adhere compliance, and then the functional aspects of this Kubernetes cluster. And you'll see tomorrow that I'm going to dive in this a little more with kind of scalable deployment to many Kubernetes clusters across my estate from a wide view. But the experience becomes the same all the way across. So you get these rich things like GitOps integration or MetaLB integration. And then you can even turn on monitoring with Kubernetes or virtual machines using Grafana, Prometheus, or Azure Monitor, as you like.
So what you're telling me is Azure Local has the ability to manage all of these different workloads running in my environment or in an environment outside of Azure itself.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically, you're also telling me that when I am doing these deployments and managing these architectures, I can use this user interface that I'm very familiar with from my Azure experiences and really have a way to consolidate down all of my management tools into this so that I can really just simplify down my overall requirements for managing my ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly that, right? The idea was that the way you manage resources in Azure shouldn't change to what you do on premises. So we've extended the Azure management plane to your data center. And the only difference between Azure and Azure local running is the hardware and where it's destined. You manage the hardware, so you have a little more control. And so you can see I can bring down, in this case, images of Windows, whether it's
Mhm.
Windows 11 or 10 or Windows Server, or even pre-built in images with SQL Server 22 directly to it instead of having the entire marketplace available to me. I then get to
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and then you get to control things like the logical networks. Instead of creating virtual networks that are software design concept, I can create logical networks or I can create virtual networks which are an SDN concept. I can even introduce the same kind of network security groups to my Azure local logical networks. And so I can then bring down software defined firewalls to this as well.
Very, very interesting. Okay, so to wrap up, because I know we're going to have lots of great conversations about deployment and monitoring and application workloads as we get further on through the week, what would be the like quick 10-second pitch that you would give somebody about why they should consider Azure Local for the workloads they need to keep on premise?
So Azure Local is the go-to place for me to manage VMs and Kubernetes in the exact same way that I've been doing in Azure. And so I don't have to learn a new tool set or even be designed to stay on things like vCenter or VMM. I can now move towards Azure and apply policies, monitoring, and scalable deployment operations in the exact same way I'm doing to my Azure estate, but now down to the resources that run on-prem. And really the only question when I deploy a VM is where does it need to go? Where can I satisfy the latency or data sovereignty solutions that I need for my workload?
Excellent. Well, Michael, hope you have a great time at Ignite this year. And I'm excited for more customers to understand about the investments we're making here on the hybrid edge.
Yes, can't wait. Thank you.
Thanks.